Chapter 1. Born beneath twin suns, marked by fireless and now, a wanderer of dreams and death. For I am the dust between stars, the shadow cast by prophecy long betrayed. I speak from a fracture in the force, where memory has grown too heavy to bear. In the stillness beyond all war, I recall the beginning not of a hero, nor of a villain, but of a wound given form. It began beneath the twin suns of Tatooine, where light burned but did not warm. The boy's name was Anakin, born to a woman without a father, without a past, without a choice. The Force knew him, not in kindness, not in grace, but as a tool, as a key, as the hinge upon which the galaxy would bleed. He ran through dust like a whisper of thunder, fixing machines too old to remember who made them. His fingers, young but sure, opened circuits with unnatural grace. His dreams were not his own. He dreamt of stars, of flight, of battles he could not name. In his dreams, soldiers marched beneath the silver rain, their faces all the same. In his sleep, he heard orders. In his sleep, he obeyed. Elsewhere, far across the galaxy, a sea churned on Camino, and within its sterile towers, another prophecy was being shaped, silent and synthetic. Clones, gestating in fluid, humming in ranks, born of a bounty hunter's blood, not passion. They were being prepared, grown, molded, sleepless and speechless. They were not yet awake, but the Force had already bound them to the boy beneath the suns. This was no accident. Anakin's freedom was bought by a Jedi Qui-Gon Jinn, a seeker of truth in a temple of illusions. But even he, with his wild foresight, could not see the chain he had begun to tighten. The boy left his mother in chains. He smiled at the stars. He thought himself saved. But salvation is a cruel mirror. In truth, his soul had already been branded by prophecy, chained to duty, set upon a path not of his own making. The Jedi did not understand him. They tested him, measured him, feared him. The Council, with eyes glazed in dogma, felt the storm stirring behind his eyes. Yoda, ancient and wary, whispered, "Clouded this boy's future is." But they accepted him nonetheless, not out of hope, but fear. They feared the Sith's return, and in that fear, they sowed the seeds of their end. But listen closer. There was another echo dot in the stillness of Camino's labs. The first of the clones opened his eyes. He did not cry, he did not speak, but somewhere in the Force, a mirror cracked. Anakin Skywalker, slave-born and Force-touched, would command them all, would fight beside them, would betray what they fought for. They were not brothers by birth, but they were bound by design, by destiny, by death. The clones would never. No Tatooine would never feel twin suns upon their armor, but the desert lived in them just the same, dry, merciless, vast. They were not men. They were echoes, repetitions, perfect replicas of a soul who sold his face to the highest bidder. But in the Force, each one burned with a flicker, a spark, a whisper of self. They would come to know pain. They would come to know choice, but not yet. Not yet. Anakin trained in the temple. His anger simmered beneath the robes. He wanted to protect. He wanted to save. He wanted to own the future. And yet, the Jedi taught him to let go. They spoke of peace, while war gathered like storm clouds. They spoke of detachment, while the galaxy wept. The boy's heart did not bend it, splintered all the while. Camino's storm never ceased. Lightning flickered over endless ocean, reflecting in the eyes of the clone engineers. Code after code, Test after test, generation after generation, their bodies grew, their minds molded, but they did not know why they existed, only that they must obey. Obedience, the sacred word, the curse disguised as programming, somewhere deep. In the force, far beneath light and dark, the ancient current stirred. The chosen one prophecy, mangled and mistranslated, hissed through time. He who brings balance, he who destroys both shadow and light, he who ends what should never have begun. Was it Anakin? Was it the clones? Or was it the death that followed? Them both, they did not know, they could not know. For the Force is not kind, it does not explain, it only binds. And now, the bindings tightened. The galaxy was not ready, the Jedi were blind, the clones were silent, and Anakin Skywalker, still a child, still lost, still hopeful, stood at the edge of a future that would burn away everything he loved. The desert still lives in him. You can hear it in the way he breathes, in the silence between his words, in the way he stares at the stars and wonders why they feel so cold. But the war has not yet begun. Not yet, not yet. The water on Camino waits. The clones sleep in light. The boy stares at his hands and wonders why they tremble in the Force. The first shadow falls. Chapter 2. The war dreamed before it began. Do not look for the first battle in the chaos of laser and steel. Look instead in the silence before it, where truth lies buried beneath illusion, where the galaxy spins quietly on the blade of prophecy, and where war is not born but remembered. The war had already begun. In thought, in shadow, in code, and dream, the war did not need to erupt. It merely needed to be revealed. The child Anakin, barely a Padawan, walked the polished halls of the Jedi Temple like a flickering flame among columns of stone. They taught him serenity. They taught him stillness. But his heart beat with thunder. In his mind, he raced against futures he could not name. Visions, flashes, worlds falling, ships breaking, troopers marching. Always the troopers. Always faceless, always obedient. The war pressed against his mind like a fog that had always been there, and far beyond Coruscant, in the storm-washed facilities of Camino, these soldiers took form, rows upon rows of half-sleeping bodies, suspended in the quiet breath of nutrient. Tanks, bubbles, rising like unspoken names. Their hearts beat before they dreamed. Their minds formed in silence, programmed not with imagination, but with purpose. They would awaken only when the war called them, and it would. Their thoughts were not yet their own. Their memories were not earned, they were given. And in the Force, they were dim stars, flickering in rhythm. The Jedi could not sense them. But the Sith had seen to it that these lives were woven into the very bones of the future. Darth Sidious moved like mist, unseen, undisturbed, but ever present. He was the whisper in the Republic's sphere, the architect behind the confederacy of separatists, the hand that fed Dooku, lies and truths alike. But deeper still, he had crafted a lie so vast it would become history. The clone army ordered long ago under a false name, commissioned not by the Jedi, but for them. A gift wrapped in war, timed to perfection, and not a single Jedi in their arrogance, in their blindness, asked why it had come to be. The Force screamed. They did not hear. Anakin, still young, still loyal, stood beside Obi-Wan on distant worlds. He wielded his saber with elegance, but his fury betrayed him. He saved lives. He defied orders. He questioned the silence in the council's halls. He did not yet know he was walking toward the center of the lie. The war did not start when Geonosis ignited. No. It began the moment the Jedi stepped into the trap with open hands, eager for control. The Clone Wars were not a tragedy, they were a ritual, a sacred slaughter dressed in military precision. Two sides, both manipulated, both expendable. There was no victor, only progression. Progression toward collapse. The Force watched. It wept in its own way, in whispers through the roots of ancient trees on Dagobah, in the broken crystals of fallen sabers, in the dreams of those who would never be born. But the Jedi did not listen. They strategized, they mapped, they measured. Victories in percentages, not in pain. On Camino, the new soldiers awakened. They blinked into fluorescence. Their first words were commands. Their first breath, a drill. Their first memory, a weapon. They moved in unity. They responded as one. But deep within, something else began to stern echo beyond code. Something unspoken they were not meant to dream. But they did, just fragments. A world they had never seen. A temple they had never entered. A voice they had never heard, soft, firm, filled with sorrow. The Force was whispering to them, though it was not allowed. And Anakin began to change. Each mission made him colder. Each loss cut deeper. He buried emotions beneath duty, but his grief grew teeth. He found kinship with the clones not in words, but in rage. He saw himself in them, manufactured, used, not trusted, and they saw in him something raw, something unlike the Jedi they were taught to follow. They saw fire, they saw command, and deep within Anakin's mind, the dreams worsened. He dreamt of temples burning. He dreamt of armor drenched in Jedi blood. He dreamt of standing in darkness, while voices cried out in confusion, in betrayal, in disbelief. He did not understand. He only knew it was coming. The war had always been coming, and when, at last, it came, it felt like remembering. The Battle of Geonosis erupted not as a beginning, but as a confirmation. The Jedi blades ignited, stood among sand and droid fire, surrounded and overwhelmed. It was then, at the edge of despair, that salvation descended in gunships, clones in gleaming white. Unquestioning, efficient, created for this moment, Yoda arrived with them. Speaking not with philosophy, but with orders. The Jedi fought side by side with soldiers they did not know, whose origin they did not question. And as the first battle ended, the galaxy entered a new rhythm, one of endless campaigns, of shifting fronts, of lightsabers and blasters drawn against machines and men alike. And no one asked who began this. No one asked what is the price of obedience. No one asked, why does the Force feel colder now than ever before? But I ask because I remember. I ask because memory is my prison. The war had been dreamt. The pieces had been moved. Anakin Skywalker, still noble, still loved, had begun to fracture. The clones, still loyal, still silent, had begun to think. And in the shadows, Sidious waited, not with rage, not with hate, but with patience and a smile. Chapter 3. Brothers of the same wound. They called each other numbers. CT 7567, CC2 224, ARC-5555, but names, like souls, do not stay silent forever. In the long void between battles, beneath armor that never came off, they began to whisper, names not assigned, but chosen, Rex, Cody, Fives, Echo. These were not designations. They were attempts at identity. Cracks in the perfect mirror. They were clones, made, not born, soldiers, not sons. They had no past to return to, no future to hope for. Their life began with war, and would end with obedience. And yet, they laughed in the dark, though their laughter was hollow. They painted their armor, though the paint was quickly washed in blood. They kept count of the dead. They carved notches into their rifles. They carried the memory of brothers whose faces were their own to the Jedi. They were troops to the Republic. They were assets. But to each other, they were all that stood between identity and oblivion. Anakin Skywalker, now a general, marched among them like a fallen star. He was different from the others. Not just in power, though the Force pulsed in him like a storm barely contained, but in how he looked at them. He did not see property. He did not see protocol. He saw himself. He saw the same chains, the same branding, the same cold control, disguised as order. And the clones saw it too. They saw a man of impossible power who was not fully trusted, a hero who disobeyed command, a brother, not by blood, but by fracture. And though he was Jedi, he was not truly of them. He was something else, a weapon the Jedi could not temper, a fire the Council could not smother in Anakin's presence. The clones stood taller. He asked their names. He fought at the front, not from safety. He never left them behind. And yet the Force grew anxious, as if it too knew this bond could not last, that loyalty, once broken, becomes a knife, that a soul divided cannot hold forever. They were brothers, Anakin and his men, but brothers of the same wound. The Jedi failed to see it. The Republic dared not ask, but the clones knew. Each mission wore them thinner. Each victory felt less like survival and more like delay. Their lives were measured in deployments, their worth in kill counts. No parades, no leave, no rest, only forward, always forward. And in the silence between stars, they began to wonder, what were they fighting for? Freedom, peace, or someone else's war, scripted long before they ever opened their eyes. On Skoko Minor, Echo died screaming. On Ryloth, hundreds burned in their ships. On Felucia, the jungle swallowed them whole. The Jedi died too often beside them, sometimes because of them. But always, it was the clones who buried the dead. Always the clones who remembered. Anakin remembered too. His fury grew sharper. Every lost life, a failure he blamed not on the Separatists, but on the Senate, on the Jedi Council, on himself. He began to question the war, not its necessity, but its truth. Why had it come? Who profited? And why did the Jedi seem so calm, as it consumed everything? Palpatine, ever patient, whispered in that silence, "You must be stronger, Anakin. The Jedi doubt you. They fear what you could become." And Anakin believed it, because, in truth, he had become something else, something between Jedi and Sith, something between servant and savior, like the clones themselves, born to serve, yearning to be more. And the war raged on. Each battlefield became a hymn to sameness, white armor, blue blades, fire in the sky. And yet within it, the cracks deepened. The clones began to keep journals. Some kept sketches, some recorded voices of brothers long dead. And when no one was listening, they whispered about peace not as a dream, but as a question. Would they be allowed to live when peace came? Or were they only meant for war? The Jedi never answered, the Republic did not speak, and the Force, ancient and impassive, offered only a slow, mournful pulse in the dark. They were brothers of the same wound. Anakin, the one who would destroy the Jedi. The clones, who would follow him even into atrocity. Not because they were evil, but because they were loyal, because they were made to be, because they were never taught another way, and still, the war moved on, still, the next planet burned, still, the next order awaited. The names they gave themselves would one day be buried beneath numbers again. Their stories would be erased, their loyalty rewritten as villainy, their grief forgotten by a galaxy eager to forget them. But I remember, I who am not alive, I who exist only to speak what others refuse to feel. They were not machines, they were not mistakes, they were men who bore another man's sorrow until it shattered them all. Chapter 4. The Shadows. Beneath the temple, do not look for monsters in the dark. They are born in light within temples, within codes, within doctrine disguised as destiny. The Jedi Temple rose like a beacon upon Coruscant, gilded and high, bathed in artificial sun. But beneath its polished floors and solemn halls grew roots of shadow deeper than its architects dared to dream. The clones did not walk these halls, not yet. Their boots were meant for war. Not sanctuaries, not shrines, but the temple marked them all the same. For, within its archive, long sealed in forgotten vaults, a phantom cipher waited, a key embedded in their minds, a signal older than their birth, Order 66, a phrase that meant nothing, until it meant everything. No Jedi ever found it, not Yoda, not Windu, not Kenobi. It was cloaked in bureaucratic truth, authorized under Republic emergency acts tied to wartime chain of command, a command that would be obeyed without question, without pause. When the words were spoken, they would move like puppets of the dark, slaying those they had followed, served, loved. But that time had not yet come. For now, the temple remained serene, filled with meditation, with prophecy, with blindness. Anakin walked those halls still, and the temple watched him, watched the boy become a man, watched the man become weapon, watched the weapon begin to ask questions. Why do they not trust me? Why do they keep me from the rank of master? Why do they make me serve, but never lead? He bowed, but his spirit burned, and in that heat, the shadow beneath the temple stirred, not in stone, not in architecture, but in the quiet suspicion that grew in his heart, planted by Palpatine, watered by war, and left unchecked by Jedi silence. Elsewhere, across the galaxy, clone commandos returned from missions that felt wrong, tasks that carried no honor, civilians silenced, artifacts seized, Jedi who gave no explanation, who executed prisoners with blank expressions. Rumors spread in the barracks of Jedi wielding both calm and cruelty, of secret sects within the order, of Jedi who spoke of peace while embracing blood. The clones felt it in their bones. The war was shifting. Something else was being built beyond victory, a structure not of strategy but of betrayal. 5's CT-5 would uncover the first, fractured his brother Tup, collapsed mid-mission, and murdered his Jedi without cause. Madness, they said. A virus, an anomaly. But 5's searched deeper. He found the chip, the inhibitor chip, embedded in every clone skull. A failsafe, a control, a death sentence, pre-installed. 5's fled, 5's begged, 5's warned. He brought his truth. to the heart of Coruscant, to Camino, to the Chancellor himself, and he died with no one listening, shot in the street like a traitor. His final words, half sane, half divine, "The nightmares are real." And they were. But no one heard, or rather, those who heard chose silence. The Jedi Council sensed a tremor, whispers of deception, ripples in the Force. Yet they acted like monks, not warriors. They convened in circles. They debated behind closed doors. Meanwhile, the war claimed thousands more, and the clones continued to obey. For what else could they do? When your thoughts are not your own, when your purpose is etched in your marrow, rebellion feels like treason against yourself. But some began to feel it anyway. A shadow behind their eyes, a pressure behind their thoughts. They could not name it, but it felt like waiting, and Anakin. He too began to feel the weight, not from within his skull, but from within his soul. He was being pulled in two directions: Jedi restraint, Sith temptation, duty and destiny, love and loss. He was the center of a prophecy he no longer trusted. The chosen one, the balancer of the Force, a title given without choice, without clarity, without kindness. And Palpatine's voice grew louder. The Jedi are plotting to take control. They do not trust you, Anakin. They never will. You must choose. The temple watched and said nothing. It watched him grieve, watched him rage, watched him lie awake at night, fearing Padme's death, visions flooding his sleep like a poison he could not escape. He told no one, for who among the Jedi would understand a love deeper than doctrine? Who among them would trade control for compassion? None, and so the temple became a tomb, not for the dead, but for what should have been protected. The clone legions prepared for their next campaigns, unaware that their fate had already been written beneath the temple's foundation. A command sealed not by strategy, but by design. Order 66, not a tactic, a prophecy, a moment buried in the bloodline of every clone, a moment that would come when the temple finally broke, but not yet, not yet. Anakin still walks those halls, Fives still dies in vain, and the shadows beneath the temple breathe without sound, coiled and patient, waiting to be spoken. Chapter 5. The Battle of Jabium, and the reign that never ended there, are planets that speak through silence, and there are others that scream forever. Jabium was one such world drenched in endless rain, its mud soaked not in water but in blood. It is remembered by none, sung of by no one. But it was here that the mask began to slip, here that Anakin Skywalker's faith cracked beyond repair, here that clones drowned in both war, and memory.jabim was no jewel, no capital, no symbol, only soil and sky drowning in storm. But in that soil, rebellion festered. Separatists had taken hold, and the Republic sought to reclaim it. They sent Jedi, they sent troopers, they sent young warriors into a war that would never end. The rain never stopped. Ships landed and vanished beneath the mire. Blasters jammed with sludge. Explosions sunk into the earth, muffled and forgotten. And the clones died by the hundreds, then thousands. They did not retreat. They did not question. Their boots marched into water and ash, armor smeared with soil that would never wash off. Lightning flickered in skies that gave no light. General Lesk, General Min, General Nemo, Jedi, each one dead, buried in muck, until only Anakin remained. He was still young, still learning, still desperate for approval, but war had no patience. His master, Obi-Wan, had vanished, captured, presumed dead. And so Anakin led the survivors, a boy commanding an army of men born for this moment, their faces the same, their deaths unrecorded. And still they followed him. They fought without hope. They bled without fear. And Anakin did not break. He hardened. The rain washed away his doubt. The cries of the dying grew distant. The weight of command. Once unbearable became. Normal, even comforting. He ordered charges that failed. He led assaults that collapsed. His men died, and he remembered each name. But the grief grew quieter. In the night, he wandered the perimeter, soaked and sleepless. A Clone CT 2010, called Drake by his brothers, once asked him why he never sought shelter. Anakin said nothing, only stared into the dark, eyes reflecting the lightning. He did not hate the clones, but he no longer mourned them, because if he did, he would fall. So instead, he moved like a blade, unstoppable, unyielding. The men followed because he survived, because he stood while others crumbled. And in that, they believed, not in the Republic, not in victory, but in him, even when the Republic abandoned them, for that is what happened. The storm grew worse. Communications failed. Reinforcements never came. The Jedi Council, distant and logical, deemed Jabiam lost. A tactical withdrawal was issued from high command. No rescue, no extraction. Anakin was ordered to evacuate only the Padawans and high-ranking Jedi survivors. The clones were to remain. They were not told, they were not asked, and Anakin obeyed. He led the young Jedi to safety. He left the clones behind. He felt it in his bones. This is not what heroes do, but he did it anyway, because he was told to, because that is what Jedi do. And in that act, something in him died. The Republic had always used the clones, but now Anakin saw they would discard anyone, even him, especially him, and the clones who lived. Those few who survived the drowning trenches, the orbital bombardment. The betrayal remembered too. They remembered the silence in their comes they, remembered the gunships that never returned. They remembered that the Jedi left them, and some would forgive, and some would not. The Battle of Jabiam faded from records, redacted, filed under containment failure. The public never knew, but the Force remembered. It echoes still in broken armor buried in mud, in graves with no names, in Anakin's sleepless nights, where the sound of rain is no longer weather, but guilt. He would not speak of Jabiam again, but it never left him. It followed him through every war zone, every order, every battle. When he led men to their deaths, he thought of Jabiam. When he looked into the eyes of troopers awaiting his command, he saw the ones he left. And when he would one day raise his blade against the Jedi Temple itself, he would feel no horror, only symmetry. This was where the illusion ended. Jabiam was not the turning point, but it was the prophecy's first toll. A wound left open, a sky that never cleared. A boy who learned that loyalty was a myth, and that the only truth was power. Chapter 6. The general who did not sleep, he was not like the others. He did not rest between battles. He did not meditate after victory. He did not retreat into reflection or healing. Anakin Skywalker did not sleep. Not truly. He walked the steel halls of his flagship, the Resolute, long after the lights dimmed. His boots echoed through silence that even the clones feared to interrupt. Some said they saw him in the hangar, staring out into hyperspace for hours, unmoving, as if trying to see what lay beyond light itself. Others whispered he spoke aloud. To no one, or to someone no longer living. He was a Jedi, but he felt more like a storm wrapped in flesh. The clones under his command both admired and feared him. He led from the front. He took the most dangerous tasks for himself. He defied orders to protect his men. And yet, there was a presence in Himan's intensity that crushed the air, made even veterans glance away from his gaze. When he laughed, it was short and strange, like he remembered how it sounded but not what it meant. When he was silent, it was worse. Captain Rex, who knew him better than most, often stood beside him on the bridge, saying nothing. No orders were needed. They trusted one another in the way brothers trust what cannot be spoken. But Rex saw the change. He saw the way Anakin stared at the floor after receiving orders from the council. He saw the coldness when talking about strategy. He saw the exhaustion, not of the body, but of the soul. And Rex, too, was changing. The clones were supposed to be uniform, interchangeable, born of one face. But over time, differences emerged. One clone limped from an old wound that never healed properly. Another carved names into his gauntlet, names of brothers who didn't make it. Some painted sigils on their helmets. Some wore trophies. Some rewired their HUDs to blink in silent code. Communicating without words, they were not becoming disloyal. They were becoming real. And the Jedi noticed. Some frowned. Others ignored. A few smiled uncertainly, but said nothing. The war had moved too fast for reflection. The Republic needed soldiers, not sons. But the clones had already made themselves sons of war, of duty, of each other. And in Anakin they found something dangerous. Not leadership, but kinship. He, too, was changing. He, too, was becoming someone the Jedi could not predict. Ahsoka Tano, his Padawan, saw it clearest. She was brave, loyal, sharp, dash-eyed. She followed him not because she had to, but because she believed. And for a time, that belief kept Anakin steady. But even she noticed the weight pressing down on him, the long silences, the fury, barely contained in his voice when the council contradicted his orders. The way his hand lingered near his saber hilt when speaking to politicians. She saw the grief when missions failed, and worse, she saw the satisfaction when vengeance was taken, for Anakin no longer believed that the war could be won through mercy. He had witnessed too many betrayals, too many fallen comrades, too many innocents buried under rubble while politicians argued over treaties. He had begun to believe something darker, that the Jedi were losing not because they lacked numbers, but because they lacked will. And in the shadow of that belief, Palpatine whispered, always whispering. The Chancellor became a second master, speaking truths the Jedi would not. You care for your men, Anakin. That is a strength. They would follow you anywhere. Not because they are programmed, but because they believe in you. You deserve more than a seat beside men who fear your power. Anakin did not protest because in his heart a truth had begun to bloom. The Jedi do not understand me. They never have. They never will. The force around him began to twist, subtle, almost imperceptible. To most, it felt like determination, purpose, strength, but in truth, it was fracture. A sacred blade splitting down the middle. The prophecy of the Chosen One was not a beacon, it was a curse. A destiny so large it left no room for a soul. And Anakin, the boy once weeping beneath twin suns, now stood beneath the shadow of a galaxy that had already decided who he must be. He could not sleep, because in sleep he dreamed of burning temples, of clone troopers turning their rifles on Jedi, of himself, cloaked in black, walking through flame, of a scream that began in his own throat and ended in silence. And so he did not sleep. He walked, he paced, he fought, he led, and in every action the war deepened its grip. The clones obeyed, but they saw. They felt their general was drifting, not away from them, but away from the light, and still they followed, because they believed, because loyalty was stronger than understanding, because they were made to obey, but had chosen to trust, and in that trust lay a tragedy neither side could yet see. For what do you do when your leader falls? What do you do when the brother you followed into fire becomes something else? What do you do when the only one who ever saw you as human becomes the thing you were made to fear? That time would come, but not yet, not yet. Now, the general does not sleep, and neither do the stars. Chapter 7. The Siege of Umbara and the Mask of Krelif. There was ever a world made by the Force to reflect madness. It was Umbara, a world without sun, its skies choked with ash and colorless clouds. The land twisted, bioluminescent and cruel. Trees breathed, shadows moved, and nothing was ever fully dead. The very air poisoned the senses. It was war incarnate, and into it the clones descended. Nameless, loyal, their enemy was not only the Umbaran militia, their enemy was truth. General Pong Krell led them, not Anakin, not Rex, not any soul who knew their faces or honored their lives. Anakin had been called away to Coruscant, summoned by the Council for matters undisclosed. In his place came Krell, a basilisk Jedi, towering, four-armed, cruel in silence, and revered only by the High Council that could not see beneath his robe. He did not ask their names. He did not know their deaths. He only gave orders, brutal, precise, impossible, wave after wave. Krell sent them into the jaws of Umbara's nightmares. They died by the dozens, then by the hundreds, for positions that meant nothing, for victories that bled away in hours. All for glory. Krell never shared. Rex obeyed, because he was a clone, because obedience was survival. But he felt the wound widening. Something in Krell's command was wrong, not only in method, but in intention. There was no care, no strategy for survival, only conquest, only death. Jesse protested. Hardcase cursed. Fives began to question not just Krell, but everything. Why are we dying like this? Does he even want us to win? The answer came too late. In the madness of the siege, Krell gave a final order, one that broke the illusion. To clone regiments, misled by false coordinates, were sent to slaughter each other. No enemy, no droids, only brothers turned unknowingly. Upon brothers, the clones obeyed, because they were trained to, because they had to, and when the masks came off, they stared into the eyes of their own faces, dying with the same confusion, the same agony, the same betrayal Anakin had once seen in his dreams. It was no accident. It was a test. Krell had fallen long ago. He was not a Jedi, not anymore. He was a shadow in Jedi robes, of future Sith apprentice, seduced by power, promised a seat beside the new Emperor. He had come to prove something, that clones were nothing but tools, that they would kill without question, that the Republic's army was built on a lie of loyalty, and for a moment it seemed he was right, until Rex refused, until Fives resisted, until Dogma, once the most obedient of all, his blaster on Krell, and ended the nightmare. The clones did not cheer, they did not celebrate. They buried their dead with their own hands, and in the wet soil of they buried something else - trust. The trust that the Jedi always knew best. The belief that the war was being led with honor. The hope that their lives had meaning. Beyond tactics, Krell had exposed the truth, not just about himself, but about the fragile line between command and cruelty. The Force had not warned them. The Council had not intervened. They had been left to die under a traitor's flag, and no one would ever answer for it. When Anakin returned, they did not speak of it, but he saw it in their eyes, and they saw it in his. The Force was cracking everywhere, in the temple, in the field, in the men. The war was no longer about victory. It was about enduring something already lost. Ambara was not a battle. It was a prophecy of what was coming, of what they would become, of what the Jedi would fail to see, until it was far too late. Chapter 8: Ashes of the Padawan. Shadows of the Council. Before the fire, there was doubt. Before the purge, there was silence. And before the fall, there was Ahsoka Tano. She was the last light in Anakin Skywalker's life that still shone without shadow. Not because she was perfect, but because she believed in the Jedi, in the clones, in him, and the galaxy swallowed her just the same. The temple that raised her, the great bastion of order and peace, turned its eyes against her in suspicion. A bomb exploded in the sacred halls. Younglings cried, archives burned, innocence died, and in the smoke, the Council saw not evidence, but opportunity. Not justice, but expedience. They accused her, their own, a Padawan, a soldier, a protector. They cast her out with ritual dignity. But the betrayal clung like oil. She was not given time. She was not given trust. She was given judgment. Cold, swift, unyielding, Anakin protested. He fought behind closed doors. He argued in council chambers. He investigated on his own. And still he could not stop it. He watched as she was shackled and led through the temple, his temple like a criminal. He watched the clones avert their eyes, silent in their sorrow. He watched the council sit with unmoved faces, hands folded, as if nothing sacred had shattered. And in his heart, something began to burn. He found the truth, of course, the real traitor. A fallen Jedi named Barriss Offee, who had come to believe what Anakin feared, that the Jedi had lost their way, that they were no longer peacekeepers, but generals, that the war had corrupted everything. She confessed, tearfully, honestly, but the damage was done. The council offered apology as if it were water to a man already drowned, and Ahsoka refused. She walked away, not in anger, but in sorrow. She left behind her saber, her rank, her future, and Anakin called her name into the temple wind, but she did not turn back. In that moment, he saw the truth written in silence. Even the purest heart can be discarded. The Jedi had failed her, just as they had failed him, and the clones saw it. They watched the soldiers they fought beside be doubted, tried, and punished without trial. They watched their generals be treated as liabilities the moment they showed pain, uncertainty, or defiance. They understood what it meant. They were expendable, so were the Jedi, so was everyone. Rex said nothing, but his silence was heavier then. A sermon. Anakin changed after that. He smiled less, he obeyed more, and believed less. He began to hold his own secrets. Long conversations with Palpatine, masked as political counsel. Unspoken visions of Padme dying, of galaxies falling, of himself rising in darkness to save them all. He told no one, for who was left to trust? The council, they had let Ahsoka fall. The clones, they obeyed. But they would never understand the burden of prophecy. Ahsoka, she was gone, and the Force, once warm in his hands, now pulsed with chill winds and silent questions. He began to feel surrounded, not by enemies, but by illusions. Every friend became a threat, every truth a mask. And still he fought the war, saber lit, orders given, victories stacked like bricks in a tomb. The Jedi did not see the storm, but the clones did. They watched their general sharpen his fury into discipline. They watched him speak less and command more. They watched him become what the Republic needed, and lose what made him him. And somewhere, on some battlefield, Ahsoka wandered, alone, free, but scarred. She felt the Force shift. She felt her master slipping, but she could not return. The temple had spoken. Her silence now was not betrayal, it was mercy, and the council sat high, still blind, still speaking of destiny and balance, as if balance could be forged in blood. The clones suited up. Anakin gave the next order, and in the shadows of that command, the final fracture deepened. The Force did not scream, it whispered. The time is coming. The trap is nearly closed. The fire is waiting, but not yet now. Only the ashes remain. Chapter 9. The Chancellor's voice, the Emperor's will. The voice of the Republic was warm, calming, unyielding in its tone of certainty. That voice belonged to the Chancellor Sheev Palpatine, elected servant, adored sovereign, shepherd of war. He spoke with clarity, with concern, with wisdom, and in every word there was poison. It was not the poison that kills swiftly, it was the poison that lingers. It enters the bloodstream of belief. It sickens the soul quietly until truth is no longer recognized. Palpatine was not a tyrant, not yet. He was a listener, a counselor. 2 senators, he offered stability. 2 citizens, he promised safety. To the clones, he gave honor, and to Anakin Skywalker, he gave attention. Where the Jedi offered riddles and walls, Palpatine offered clarity. He praised Anakin in public. He called him the most gifted Jedi of his generation. He whispered that greatness was being wasted, chained by a fearful council, bound by rules designed to limit, not guide. Anakin listened. He should not have, but he did. The council, sensing the darkness tightening its hold, attempted a desperate maneuver. They appointed Anakin as their spy, a double agent, trusted by Palpatine, but answering to the order. It was not an honor. It was suspicion in disguise. They still would not grant him the title of master. They still questioned his loyalty. They still saw him as the child they never fully accepted. And in that fracture, Palpatine built a throne. You must understand, Anakin, the Chancellor said, voice low as silken venom. The Jedi seek control. They have no place in this new galaxy. They speak of peace, yet wage war. They speak of balance, yet demand submission. And then, the final temptation. He spoke of Darth Plagueis, a Sith Lord said to possess power over life and death, power to save those you love from dying, a story wrapped in legend. But Anakin's dreams of Padme's death had become unbearable. He saw her gasping, crying, his arms cradling a corpse that should have lived. He believed Palpatine could save her, because he had to believe, because the Jedi would never allow such knowledge, because they feared what they did not control, and Palpatine no longer concealed his identity. I am the Sith, he said, not with a scream, not with a savor, but with a whisper laced with offer. Not death, not cruelty, but salvation. For Padam, for the clones, for order. Anakin did not strike him down. He could have, he should have, but he did not, because he was already consumed. He brought the truth to Windu at last, desperate for guidance, hoping perhaps that the Council would act justly, would save the Republic without descending into vengeance. But Windu's eyes did not soften. "If what you told me is true, Anakin," he said, "you will have earned my trust, earned, still not given, still conditional." And with that, the fate of the galaxy was sealed. Windu confronted the Chancellor. They fought, lightning and blade, truth against lies, and Anakin arrived at the edge of that battle, watching both sides, watching ideals fracture, watching the Jedi attempt an execution, not a trial. And in that moment, he chose for the Republic, not for the Jedi, not even for the Sith. He chose for fear. He chose for love. He chose for control. He severed Windu's arm. The Chancellor did the rest. A Jedi Master fell, screaming into Coruscant's storm, and Anakin fell with him, kneeling not out of reverence, but because the weight of what he had done had buckled him to the floor. Palpatine stood over him. "You are fulfilled now. You are no longer Jedi. You are no longer slave. You are mine." And so the voice of the Chancellor faded, and the will of the Emperor was born. The war was no longer a conflict. It was a ritual, nearly complete. Anakin Skywalker had made his choice, the chosen one, savior of the Jedi, hero of the Clone Wars, bowed not to darkness, but to desperation. Chapter 10, Order 66, and the echo of 1,000 betrayals. It was not shouted. It was not screamed. It was spoken softly, as if it were always meant to be. Execute Order 66. 3 words, no thunder, no storm, just a code buried in blood, carved into the bone of every clone trooper from the moment they were born. A whisper, born not in war, but in design, not in strategy, but in prophecy. And when it was spoken, the galaxy cracked not with fire first, but with silence. Across 1,000 worlds, Jedi stood among their men. On Felucia, Master Isla, Sekiro walked through a sunlit glade. On Maigito, Ki-Adi-Mundi led a charge across the ice. On Cato Neimoidia, Plo Koon soared in his starfighter. On Saliukami, Saints Ali chased echoes through dust. They were calm, focused, guiding, and in one breath they became prey. No argument, no hesitation, no mourning. The clones turned. Their hands did not shake. Their eyes did not weep. They obeyed because the command was not given. It was unlocked. The inhibitor chips pulsed. Minds shifted, not against their will through it. Every lesson, every moment, every bond forged in battle, now rewritten by a single protocol. The Jedi were not comrades. They were enemies of the Republic. That was the truth now. That was the only truth, and they fell. They fell without final words. They fell with sabers still lit. They fell by the hands of those they named brothers. It was not war, it was extermination, and the force itself recoiled. A great silence fell across its current, like breath held too long. The light flickered, the veil thinned, the balance shattered. Only a few survived. Yoda, sensing the wave before it arrived, turned and struck. First green blade, flashing in sorrow, OBI-1, betrayed on the ridge of Utapau, thrown into the depths, and left for dead, barely escaped. But most, did not. The temple itself was not spared. On Coruscant, it rose into the dusk like a monument to hope, and into it marched Anakin Skywalker, not in armor, but in darkness, clad in black dot eyes, hollow, heart-burning. He brought the 501st with him, the most loyal, the most decorated, the most known. Rex did not walk beside him, for something in Rex resisted. A fracture in the chip, a memory of fives, a flicker of warning, but others followed, not because they hated the good Jedi, because they had no choice, and Anakin led them through the gates. He said nothing as younglings bowed to him. He said nothing as masters begged. He said nothing as his blade ignited. It was not justice, it was not vengeance. It was destiny spoken through fire, the prophecy fulfilled, but twisted, not balance, extinction, not peace, silence, dot order. 66 did not end in a single day. It bled across the stars, system by system, moon by moon. The Jedi became whispers, then ghosts, then myths. The clones, when it was done, returned to barracks. Armor stained, hands still, no medals, no words. Some wept in secret. Some stared at their hands and did not recognize them. Some remembered. Not all the chips worked. Not all minds stayed silent. Some saw what they had done and could not explain it. The inhibitor was not perfect. The inhibitor was not perfect. The guilt was. And the war was over. But the war was not over. The Chancellor stood before the Senate and declared the truth. The Jedi had betrayed them. The Republic had been attacked from within. A new empire would rise stronger, safer, eternal. The crowd roared. They did not ask for proof. They did not ask for truth, because fear speaks, louder than reason. And in the shadow of that fear stood Darth Vader, no longer Anakin, no longer Jedi, a weapon reborn, and across the stars. The Force mourned not with screams, but with silence. It had warned, it had wept, and it had failed. The galaxy turned a page, not to peace, but to control, not to unity, but to obedience, and in every clone's breath there remained the faintest echo of what they had done. Chapter 11. The Birth of Darth Vader and the Tomb of Skywalker writ did not happen in a single strike, not in the Temple Massacre, not when Windu fell from the tower, not even when Order 66 was spoken like scripture across the stars. The death of Anakin Skywalker was slower, a ritual, not a moment, a burial in layers of silence, rage, betrayal, and fear, a soul wrapped in black, suffocated beneath prophecy, and when he rose from the flames, he was no longer the boy from Tatooine. He was Darth Vader, not the machine, not yet, but the spirit. His name once spoken with awe and affection was sealed away. None dared utter Anakin again, not the council, now dead, not the Senate, now cheering, not the clones, now silent in his presence. He walked as a shadow, his voice lower, his gaze colder, his purpose absolute. Palpatine crowned him not with ceremony, but with command. Go to Mustafar, the Emperor said. There you will end the war. And so he did. The separatist leaders gathered like exiles in the Furnace World's fortress, expecting negotiation, expecting pardon. They saw Anakin approach and breathed relief. They did not see Vader. Not until it was too late. He cut them down, with precision. No rage, no hesitation, no words. Blades sang in molten light, and the war ended, not with treaties, but with silence. On Coruscant, the Emperor spoke of peace. In secret, Vader stood alone in the steam of a volcanic grave. This was his reward, not power, but emptiness. Padme arrived, tears in her eyes, still believing he could be saved. Still calling him Anakin. He could not bear it. He begged her to join him, to rule beside him, to abandon the broken codes and build something new. But she recoiled, not from what he said, from what he had become. And then Obi-Wan stepped from the shadows, a friend, a brother, too late. Their battle tore through the lava fields, sabers flashing against fire. Two legends, two ghosts, one desperate to save the man he loved, the other desperate to kill the part of himself still capable of regret. It was not a duel, it was a funeral. Obi-Wan did not win. Anakin lost. He lost to his own fury, to his own pride, to his own prophecy. And as the lava swallowed him, his flesh burned, his breath broke, and he screamed not in pain, but in realization he had destroyed everything. Padme died soon after, her body untouched, her heart broken. She whispered his name with her final breath. Not Vader, Anakin. The Jedi were gone, the Republic dissolved, the Chosen One consumed, and then the machine. Palpatine found him barely alive, crumpled in ash, spirit smoldering. Clone surgeons rebuilt the wreckage. Steel bones, black armor, a prison of breath. When he awoke, the room fell silent. He did not ask for light. He did not ask for forgiveness. He asked for her. Where is Padme? The Emperor lied. In your anger, you killed her. And in that moment, Anakin Skywalker died. Whatever soul remained was drowned in the scream that followed. The Force rippled. A wound opened. A shadow deepened. Vader rose, not as a man, but as an echo, bound not by hope, but by memory. His armor became tomb and temple, a cage that breathed for him, a shell that burned with what he lost. And across the galaxy, the Empire knelt. The Jedi were dust. The Senate dissolved. The clones, now enforcers of fear, marched in silence. And Vader stood beside the Emperor not as heir, but as proof that destiny could be perverted, that prophecy could be rewritten, that the Chosen One was not salvation, but corruption incarnate. Chapter 12. The Silence of the Clones and the Rise of the Inquisitors. When the war ended, the clones expected purpose. What they found was silence. No more missions, no more generals, no more Jedi, only orders. Guard this sector, patrol this city, enforce this curfew. And when they asked why, the answer was always the same. The Empire has no room for doubt. They did not speak of the Jedi they had killed. They did not speak of the ones who escaped. They did not speak of the voice that spoke Order 66 into their bones. For some, silence was loyalty. For others, it was grief. The chips remained, humming quietly behind their eyes. Most did not know why they obeyed. They remembered battle, brotherhood, but the day the temple fell, those memories felt ... distant, hollow, like they belonged to someone else. They were no longer soldiers of war. They were tools of fear, and fear requires something more than armor. It requires monsters, and so the Inquisitors were born, not clones, not SITH, not Jedi. Something else. They were Jedi, ones, many of them, Padawans, knights, survivors, broken, turned, reshaped by the Emperor's hand, tortured until obedience replaced belief, until pain became clarity, until the lightsaber meant domination, not defense. They took new names: the fifth brother, the seventh sister, the ninth, numbers, not identities. They did not speak in the Force, they hunted it. They did not kneel to the code, they shattered it. Their mission was simple: erase what remains. Every Jedi survivor was a threat, a crack in the illusion of peace, a memory of a time when hope was allowed to live. The Inquisitors found them in caves, on farms, among beggars and rebels, and they burned them. The clones sometimes watched. Their helmets did not move, but behind those visors some flinched, not because they loved the Jedi, but because the Inquisitors were what they feared they themselves would: become loyal without thought, ruthless without soul. Vader led them. He did not speak often. When he did, it was enough. His presence drained the room. His breath filled it. Every step echoed like a tomb closing. The Inquisitors obeyed him without question, not out of devotion, out of terror. He taught them not with words, but with pain. When one failed, he did not chastise. He punished brutally, publicly, so the rest would remember, and still they followed. For to displease the Emperor was death, but to displease Vader was worse, and so, one by one, the last Jedi were hunted, their sabers extinguished, their temples defiled, their names forgotten. But still the Force whispered. It lingered in shadows, in dreams, in whispers passed between frightened refugees who still remembered the name Kenobi, in the hearts of children who moved objects without touching them, in the trembling hands of clones who remembered marching beside heroes and now stood beneath tyrants. Some troopers deserted, disappeared, removed their armor, removed their numbers, tried to become men. Others stayed because they could not imagine anything else, because the silence was easier than guilt. And Vader, he did not forget them. He remembered every face that obeyed and every face that hesitated. The clones were phantoms of his past, echoes of Anakin's sins. He could not destroy them, but he could leave them behind, and so, phase by phase, they were replaced not with soldiers, with stormtroopers, uncloned, untested, unquestioning, less precise, more obedient. The clone legions were retired, not with honor, but with indifference, and they faded into the underworld, into exile, into silence. But they remembered. Some told the stories, some carved names into stone, some waited for something they could not name, and somewhere in the dark places of the Force, the memory of Anakin Skywalker stirred, not as guilt, but as warning. The Jedi were nearly extinct, but the Force was not, and darkness, left unchecked, does not remain still. It festers and calls to those born in silence to rise. Chapter 13. The Ghost of Kenobi and the Twilight of the Clones he became. A myth before he became a memory. Obi-Wan Kenobi, Jedi Master, Negotiator, General, vanished in the wake of the Purge. His name was scrubbed from records, his victories erased, his very existence denied by the Empire. But among the clones, his memory remained. He had led without cruelty. He had spoken their names. He had mourned the dead as more than numbers. And when he vanished, he became more than a man. He became a question. Did he die? Did he flee? Would he return? The clones asked in silence. They did not speak his name aloud, but it haunted them, quietly, beneath the armor that no longer fit. For most, the war had ended. But for those who had walked beside Kenobi, beside Skywalker, the war never left. It echoed in every command, every empty hallway. Every time a stormtrooper passed and did not salute, the galaxy moved on. The Empire's grip tightened. Clone outposts were decommissioned, weapons reassigned, squads disbanded. Rex, once captain of the 501st, went underground. Gregor vanished. Wolf wandered. Others simply faded. They tried to live as civilians, but civilians did not understand war. They tried to find peace, but peace was not made for soldiers born in tubes. They tried to forget, but memory was printed into their genes, and still, in hidden places, the Force moved, not loudly, not with lightning or war, but with seeds. In distant deserts, in backwater towns, whispers began. A hermit, a warrior, a man with tired eyes who carried a saber. He did not ignite. He went by Ben, but some remembered his real name. He watched the boy, the one born from Padme's dying breath, the one Vader believed gone. Luke Kenobi did not intervene. He did not teach. He waited, because waiting was all that was left. He had buried too many. The Jedi were dust, the clones scattered, the Republic only a scar in the sand. But in the stillness of the Force, Kenobi felt the weight of unfinished fate. He had watched a brother fall. He had watched the galaxy turn, and now he watched hope grow, small and fragile, in the form of a child. Elsewhere, Vader searched not just for Jedi, for him, for the man who left him to burn, for the name that still echoed in his sleep, for the only being who had seen Anakin and walked away. But he could not find Kenobi, because Kenobi had learned the art of silence, the same silence the clones had mastered. It became a bond between the broken. Now and then, old brothers found each other in the alleys of Nar Shah Dda, in the forests of Seelos, in the dust of forgotten moons. They exchanged nods, not greetings, not stories, just nods, because there was nothing to say. They were relics now, living reminders of a war no one wanted to remember. They aged faster than men. They carried wounds deeper than scars, and in each of them lived the same quiet question: was it worth it? Did we fight for freedom, or for power in disguise? Did we protect peace, or help extinguish it? The Empire did not answer. It never had to. Its stormtroopers marched in clean white armor, uncloned, unknowing, unquestioning, and yet beneath that sterile order, the Force stirred, because the ghost of Kenobi still breathed, and the twilight of the clones had not yet become night. Something remained, not vengeance, not rebellion, but a whisper, that the story was not over, that beneath the ashes of betrayal, embers still glowed. Chapter 14: The Apprentice of Darkness and the Seed of Rebellion in the Shadow of the Empire. Where fear ruled and silence reigned, he moved without mercy, instrument shaped not by fate but by loss. Darth Vader, apprentice of the Emperor, enforcer of a new order, no longer a general, no longer a man, a wound-given voice. He hunted what the Empire feared: hope, Jedi survivors, hidden temples. Children whispered to be touched by the Force. He crushed them with blade, with silence, with certainty. For years he carved across the galaxy, not as ruler, but as an executioner. Planets fell quiet at the rumor of his ship. Moons surrendered before his arrival. He was the dark made flesh, but darkness breeds resistance. Not openly, not yet. Just a spark, an encrypted message, a stolen ration, a refusal. To Neil, it was not yet the rebellion, but it was its seed in the outer rim. Insurgents whispered names the Empire thought extinct. Bail Organa, senator in shadow, smiling in the Senate by day, building networks by night. Mon Mothma, eyes wide with caution, voice wrapped in diplomacy, yet soul unbowed. Ahsoka Tano, reborn not as Jedi, but as something else, hidden in code names and quiet missions. They did not believe they could win, but they believed they must resist. And in secret corridors, among broken droids and fading stars, they began to gather. One cell here, one pilot there, one refugee willing to carry a message even unto death. And the Empire, for all its strength, did not see them, but Vader felt them. He felt it in the Force. A rising tide, unclear, undefined, but real. It pulled at him like a memory he could not kill, for within the growing defiance, something stirred that he had long buried. Remorse, not love, not guilt, just wait, not yet conscience, but echo. He crushed it when he could. He hunted insurgents, oversaw inquisitors, burned archives and buried names. But the more he destroyed, the more others rose, and far across the stars, a hidden figure trained in secret. Galen, Marek, a child of war, born in shadow, raised by Vader himself in a whisper of treason. An apprentice, not sanctioned by the Emperor, hidden weapon to be used against his master one day. But Galen too became something else, not pawn, not Sith, something unshaped when he fell and rose again. He became a spark beyond Vader's control, and through him the rebellion was named. It had no fleet, no banners, no anthem, only a symbol, and that was enough. The symbol spread to slaves in the spice mines, to smugglers tired of blood money, to farmers who remembered the sound of freedom, to clones in hiding who once wore the wrong armor but still knew what honor felt like. And Vader watched, not because he feared them, but because he recognized them. The rebellion was not born from politics. It was born from regret, from the hands that pulled, triggers they didn't believe in, from the eyes that saw friends turned to enemies, from the belief that there must still be light. Even now, even in this, the Emperor did not fear that rebellion. He feared Skywalker. He felt the memory clinging to Vader like smoke to stone. And so, he bound his apprentice tighter, sent him deeper, promised him more power, rank, control. But Vader no longer sought control. He sought silence, because every scream he ended brought back a voice he could not silence. Podm Kenobi, the children he would never know. The Force had not forsaken him. It had simply waited, and now it whispered again through rebels, through lost apprentices, through stars beginning to flicker with defiance. Ahsoka walked beneath a different name. Bail Organa began to plan, and in the dust of Tatooine, the boy grew, and the galaxy turned once more, not toward balance, but toward reckoning. Chapter 15. The Sons of Skywalker and the Hidden Flamin', the ashes of the Clone Wars. Two embers remained, not warriors, not Jedi, not yet, but children born of prophecy and tragedy, twins, sundered by fear, hidden by faith, born in the final breath of Padme. Amidala.Luke.Leia. They were the final secret of the Jedi, the final failure of the Sith. Their blood carried destiny neither innocent nor cursed, but bound to Anakin, to Vader, to the Force itself. And so, the galaxy swallowed them. Leia was taken to Alderaan, raised as royalty among marble halls and political shadows, the daughter of Bail Organa, by title, rebel by soul. She learned diplomacy before she learned war, but the fire was always there. It was not taught. It was inherited. Luke was taken to Tatooine, buried in dust and labor, raised by Owen Lars, who feared the past more than the Empire. He was told nothing, given nothing, except dreams, dreams of stars, of sabers, of names he could not remember, and always, at the edge of the Dune Sea, he watched him Dune, the old man, the hermit, the ghost, Obi-Wan Kenobi, now Ben, in name only. He watched the boy grow. He kept his distance, but his spirit never left. He was not a Jedi anymore, but he remained guardian. For the flame must be shielded before it can be lit. And across the stars, the Empire tightened. Leia watched her father whisper in the dark. Senators vanishing, names erased, whole worlds silenced. She learnt to smile in public, to speak carefully, to plan, but in her heart, something stirred, something unspoken, something hers, a connection to those who felt the same silence, the same hunger, the same calling. She did not know she was Force sensitive, but the Force knew her, and watched her, and waited. Luke knew nothing of rebellion. He raced skyhoppers and complained of moisture farming, but the Force whispered to him in the winds, in the stars, in the silence between words. He looked up, always, never down, because the Force inside him had not yet remembered itself, but it would. Vader did not know. He searched for Kenobi, he hunted the Jedi, but the Emperor hid the truth even from him to control him, to deny him the past, to keep the future from waking. But fate is not so easily buried. Ahsoka moved in shadows, following rumors of children born in the last days of war. Bail built the network. Mon Mothma stirred the Senate. The spark of rebellion grew brighter, and the Force began to tremble, because balance was not destroyed, only delayed. The flame had not gone out, only hidden, buried beneath sand, wrapped in royalty, guarded by ghosts. The sons of Skywalker were not just bloodlines, they were prophecies unfulfilled. They were the last chance for light to rise, not as Jedi of the past, but as something new, something unwritten. And in the heart of Vader, beneath metal and silence and command, there was something he could not explain. A pull, a shift, a presence. He did not know the name, but the Force did. It was Luke, and time was beginning to stir again. Chapter 16. The Holocron of Shadows and the Last. Temptation. There are relics in the Force older than any empire, devices forged not with wires but with will, crystals that speak in silence. Holocrons. Not all contain wisdom, some contain wounds, buried deep beneath ancient temples. In vaults forgotten even by the Jedi, there exist holocrons, bound not by light but by memory. Shards of fallen masters, spirits half alive, echoes of screams never heard by mortal ears, and one of these was found, not by Sith, not by Jedi, by a boy, by Luke. He did not know its name. He did not know its weight. But the moment he touched it, the Force awoke, and he saw, not with eyes, with soul. He saw fire temples in ruin, sabers drowned in blood. He saw clones kneeling before corpses. He saw a man screaming in the lava, torn, between salvation and despair. He saw Anakin, he saw Vader, but he did not yet know they were the same. The holocron did not lie. It tempted, it offered answers. Why the Jedi fell, why the galaxy still trembled, why the light had not returned. It spoke of betrayal, not just of Jedi, but of truth itself, and in the shadows. Another voice called, not the Emperor, not the past, but Vader, for he too had begun to sense the disturbance, not in a planet, not in a battle, in a soul. He felt it through the Force, a thread, a connection, a presence that mirrored something he had buried long ago. He did not yet know it was his son, only that the past was not finished, and in the throne room of the Emperor, Palpatine felt it too. He smiled, not in joy, in certainty. A new piece had entered the board. The game would begin again. He instructed his agents to watch the stars, to trace the ripples. For if there was one Skywalker, there could be two. The holocron in Luke's hands pulsed. It showed him visions of Jedi in exile, of rebels rising, of Vader standing over the ashes of hope. But it also showed him a choice. You can end this, it whispered. You can bring balance. You can become what they fear. The dark side did. Not shout, it offered. It wrapped itself in logic, in need, in love, as it once had for Anakin. And Luke stood at the edge of that echo. He was not trained, he was not ready, but the Force had chosen, not because he was strong, because he was needed, and far away on Dagobah. An ancient voice stirred. Yoda, older now, smaller, fading, but awake. He felt the tremor. The holocron had opened the gate, and the last temptation was near. Because Luke was not only his father's son, he was the galaxy's reckoning, and and dark alike began to circle him. Waiting, watching, whispering. Chapter 17. Dagobah. Secrets and the echoes of the Jedi. There is a place in the galaxy untouched by maps, unnoticed by fleets, hidden not by distance, but by the will of the Force itself. Dagobah, a swamp of silence, a grave of light, and a sanctuary for one who had seen the galaxy die. Yoda, the last of the High Council, general of the Clone Wars. Exile, he did not live, he endured, surrounded by fog and vines, breathing in the rot of the old world. He spoke to no one. He taught no one. He waited, not for vengeance, not for the Republic, but for him, the boy, Skywalker's son. For prophecy is not a line, it is a spiral, and now the spiral had returned. Luke arrived as his father had once to, uncertain, burning with questions. But the man he found was not the teacher he expected. Yoda was small, hunched, ancient. He did not lecture. He listened. He watched. He tested. For the Force had shown him visions of Vader's mask cracked in moonlight, of a saber igniting in a son's hand, of balance held in fingers that had never held power. But first, training, not of the blade, of the soul. Yoda spoke in riddles, not to confuse, but to disarm. He stripped Luke of certainty, of pride, of control. Wars not make one great, he said, and Luke listened. But within him, the fire still burned. He asked of Vader, of the dark side, of his father, and Yoda turned away. Some truths could not be given, only faced, so he led Luke to the cave deep beneath Dagobah's roots. A place soaked in shadow, a wound in the Force, left by ancient death. Your weapons, you will not need them. But Luke brought them anyway. The cave did not punish, it revealed. Inside, he saw Vader, silent, waiting. They fought briefly. Luke struck true. The helmet shattered, and beneath it, his own face, not as symbol, as warning. The line between hunter and hunted is drawn not in action, but in choice. The cave showed him the path, not his fate, but his potential, and Luke emerged not wiser, not stronger, but shaken, and far away Vader stirred. He too felt the echo. Something had changed. Not a threat, a mirror, and the Emperor saw it as well. He began to speak of a trap, a new Death Star, a new plan. Everything is proceeding as I have foreseen. But there was something he had not foreseen. Hope. The Jedi were not gone, not while their memory breathed, not while Luke chose differently. Obi-Wan's voice returned to him, not in form, but in echo. He had failed to save Anakin, but he could guide. The son, your father was seduced by the dark side, but there is still good in him. Luke heard the contradiction, and he chose to believe both, that Vader was a monster, and that Anakin still lived beneath the mask. This was his strength, not power, compassion, and on Dagobah, Yoda weakened, his time ended, his exile complete, and in his final breath he named the truth. There is another Skywalker, Leia, twin flame, untrained, unknowing, but bound by blood, and Luke, now alone, stood between two paths, the light uncertain, ancient, scattered, the dark offered, defined, easy, and in the shadow of this choice, the Force held its breath. Chapter 18. The Death Stars. Throne and the fulfillment of prophecy, the stars gathered for a final storm. Above the forest moon of Endor, the second Death Star hung like an iron finished, yet already watching. Beneath it, fleets prepared, rebels plotted, the Empire waited, and at its heart, a throne, golden, not ornate, a simple chair, a place of invitation, for the Sith do not destroy with rage alone, they destroy with choice. Luke Skywalker had come willingly, not to kill, but to save. He surrendered himself to the darkness, hoping to redeem what it had stolen. To find his father within the mask of Vader, he stood in chains before the Emperor. Palpatine smiled, not with joy, with certainty. Your faith in your friends is yours, but your faith in your father is misplaced. He showed Luke the rebel fleet trapped, outgunned. He offered a saber, his own weapon. He whispered of power, destiny, blood. Strike me down, and your journey to the dark side will be complete. Vader stood silent beside him, no longer a hunter, now a test, but Luke did not strike the Emperor, not yet. He reached for his father. There is good in you, I can feel it. Vader answered, not with words but with a blade. The duel began. Father against son, but not as enemies, as mirrors. Each blow echoed across time. Anakin on Moose, Obi-Wan in sorrow, Dooku, Maul, Windu, all ghosts, all echoes, and still Luke held back until the Emperor goaded him with a final truth. If you will not turn to the dark side, then perhaps she will. Leia, the other Skywalker, and in that moment, unleashed not with cruelty, with fear, he drove Vader back. Strike after strike, screaming, bleeding light and rage, until Vader fell, his hand severed mechanical, like Luke's own. And Luke stopped. He saw the wires, the severed armor, the mirror, and he stepped back from the abyss. He threw down his weapon. I am a Jedi like my father before me. Palpatine's smile vanished. Lightning leaped from his fingers, raw, unnatural. Blinding, it tore into Luke, writhing, searing. He screamed, and Vader watched. He watched his son suffer, as he once had. He watched his master laugh, as he once had. And something moved within him. Not rebellion, remembrance. Not hatred, love. And Anakin Skywalker returned, not with a saber, but with a choice. He seized the Emperor. Lightning clawed at them both. It burned through circuits, through flesh, through fate. And with a final cry, Anakin hurled Darth Sidious into the void. Not for vengeance, but for redemption. The chosen one had fulfilled the prophecy, not by leading an army, but by saving his son. He collapsed, dying, and Luke pulled away the mask. There was no monster beneath, only a man, old, broken, free. Tell your sister you were right. And then, silence. Anakin Skywalker became one with the Force, not as ghost, as peace. The Death Star burned, the Empire fractured, the galaxy breathed, and in the stars above Endor, the Force shifted. Balance, long prophesied, had been restored, not in light's triumph, but in choice reclaimed. The story was not ended, but the circle was closed, and the shadow of Vader passed into legend. The end.